The scale is slightly different, and again we'll take a look at that in time, and the Diaspóireacht is slightly different as well. Very similar to the Aiste or the Alt Nuachtáin, except it's in more of a debate format, and personal expression and the actual format of the debate is very important. At this stage, I suppose, if you haven't learned the format for the debate, it may not be achievable. There's a little bit of work involved in that, an opening and a conclusion. If you have done so, well then you know exactly what we're talking about, and it's just another option for you on the paper, another two options really. So with the scale and the actor, with your choices here, you can roughly make your decision before going back to your Léamh Uiscint. You can start planning it out, and you may have some ideas just formulating in the back of your mind as you're answering the Léamh Uiscint, and I'd strongly recommend that. So read question 3 first, and then go back and do your Léamh Uiscint. Teanga Cohegsula, and then go about writing your essay. Let's take a look back, as we're saying there, at our Léamh Uiscint section. And the Léamh Uiscint section that we have here, you've got 2 questions to answer, or two Léamh Uiscinti to go through. And basically it's broken down into A and B. Number 1 being slightly different, or A, I should say, being slightly different insofar as you have, usually, for the most part, you have 2 questions in each section, and or 1 question that's worth 4 marks. So they all carry 2 marks. Usually, last question, question 5, will ask you for 2 pieces of information in relation to the same question. This is essentially an exercise in finding the information, rewording it slightly, and providing an answer. Now, as you'll see from the marking schemes from previous years, here we have the questions on Lord, Aurani Og Bishul. The question here that asks us, Cain Uber and Tish Mahori Lord. So as you go through the piece itself, you can see where the answers are to be found. Is Inaltor A Ahar, Vic O'Connor, Agus is Fila Anta E Amahar, and of course you can give the names. But really, when you look at it there, that's going to get you the same amount of marks as writing out all the information that you have in the passage there. So it's about accuracy, it's about making sure that you have obviously the right answer first and foremost, but don't go about writing out half the paragraph, because if you do so, you will lose marks. So it's very important to be accurate in your answers and to give as precise an answer as possible. And that's pretty much, you know, all the advice you can give for that. It changes year on year. If you ask for 1 piece of information, give 1 piece of information. If you ask for 2, give 2. It's not advisable to give any more than 2, because it has asked you just for 2, and really what that says to the examiner is that you didn't understand the question fully. Or if it asks for 1 and you give 2, thinking that you're doing good, you're actually not. It's not advisable. If you're asked for 1, just give the 1, because the examiner will interpret that you haven't understood the question, and therefore you will lose marks as a result. So again, 1 piece of information required, 1 piece of information supplied. So you don't go given any more than you have to. Again, you know, going back in previous years, we have our marking schemes and we have our sample answers and we have the correct answers there. Obviously, with the limited amount of time we have here, we don't have time to go through each one of them. But just to show you in the second reading comprehension how this differs, particularly in questions 4 and 5. Questions 4 and 5, I should say questions 1 to 3, they tend to follow the same line of questioning as the first reading comprehension. When we get to questions 4 and 5, it's very different, because they'll give you perhaps a sentence from one, not directly from one of the pieces, a reworded sentence or an idea from the piece itself, and you have to identify which paragraph this phrase or this idea belongs to. So really, it's advisable to read this question. I would say read questions 4 and 5 before answering questions 1 to 3. Because by reading the phrase itself, you know what you're looking out for while answering questions 1 to 3. It might save you a minute or 2. It's just a case of perhaps identifying where this information is to be found, putting a tick or an X or highlighting it in the passage itself, and then it's a simple case of writing down, as you can see here, Alta Hain, Alta Do, Alta Tree, Alta Car, Alta Cook, wherever it belongs to. They don't always come in order. They don't always come in the order that, you know, it's not necessarily question 4 is going to be first. The answer to question 5 is going to be second. They have been mixed up in previous years, so just keep an eye out for that. Similarly with questions 1 to 3, for the most part, they tend to follow the script. They tend to follow, be it, you know, question 1A tends to be in the opening kind of section, question 1B following that perhaps into paragraph 2, and so on. and that's obviously the case for the previous comprehension as well, except in question 5, where it can ask you for pieces of information that relate to any of the paragraphs really in question. So following that, we move on to our Tríocha Teanga Chomhaigh Súile, and with the Tríocha Teanga Chomhaigh Súile, what we find is they're tough questions. Okay, they are very, very tough questions. The first section tends to be based on verbs, and it tends to be based on changing verbs from one tense to another. And of course, with the amount of time that we have this evening, it's impossible to go through absolutely every single aspect of that. It's impossible to go through every tense that we have, but you need to know your basic rules. The basic rules for past, present, future tense. In the first group of verbs, second group of verbs, and of course in those Bríthe Neamh Rialta, because the Bríthe Neamh Rialta, there tends to be one that features every year. You'll also need to be very familiar with the Ser Bríthe, or the Bríthe Ser, and the endings that relate to that, because they do feature quite a lot in these exam questions. And of course, it does need to be rewritten, and it needs to be rewritten into the correct tense. I'd always recommend that you get the highlighter out or the red pen out and highlight that word that's changed to show the examiner where exactly the marks to be gotten here. It will give you one example, which is fantastic, and that kind of points the way as to if you are unsure, be it I'm sure Cacha, I'm sure Lorach, I'm sure Oshnach, or Mo Canealach. It points the way as to what the rest of the verb should be changed to if you're not 100% sure, be that in ending or be that in rules relating to the verbs and the tenses they belong to. So, following that, we have the slightly different part of the exam, the different part of the exam in relation to grammar, and there's no copper fastened rule on this. There's no rule that we can say 100% this will come up or this has come up before. Some basic aspects of grammar, such as numbers and the rules pertaining to numbers, be that personal numbers or Bunivrica, some rules in relation to counties, in relation to masculine, feminine, the Inchkina, rules in relation to Révokal Cohitcha. It changes every single year, and because there are only 5 of the questions, it's nearly impossible to predict with any sort of sense of surety or which ones will come up. It's really just down to, I suppose, practice to date, and on the day, if you can spot by reading the sentence, if you can spot the aspect of grammar that needs to be changed, you should know from practice and you should know from previous experience which one it is. If all else fails, go with your gut, go with the way it sounds, and more often than not, that tends to be the case that you are right. It's really down to experience in using the language and having seen and worked with it before. As I said, it's very, very difficult to prepare for that part of the exam. In the short term, it's really from first year, even back into primary school, work that you would have been doing on these aspects of grammar, going all the way back to primary school. As far as the last couple of weeks in school, that's the best preparation you've done for these. Again, in previous years, you can look back at exam papers, you can look back at marking schemes and see what's featured previously. What I have here is just a very short list of some aspects of grammar that have featured in the past on this part of the exam, and of course aspects of grammar that you need to be familiar with to write in a very accurate way, in the Ashta or the Scale or the Diasport as well. But aspects such as Anadi Tialavuk, Naheim Shari, and again the different tenses, Mo Canealach, I know it's often seen as a separate one because it is, I suppose, less used. The Bríthe Neamh Rialta, Révokal Himpli, Naformlach Révoklach, on Copal Is, Adikti, Caimlach and Project and Hadikti, such as Nice and Is, and Tishel Ginaduk to a lesser extent, August and Klein Ancient. And again, it's about the experience you've had in using the language to date, as opposed to trying to learn these things at the last minute. It won't happen for you, but be confident in what you have done previously. And as I said to you, say it to yourself, get the sound for it. If in doubt, go with your gut on it. So next after that, these answers just be written into your answer booklets, and it's just a case of highlighting the key word again that's been asked. Following that, we move on to a Capadoric section, and in the Capadoric section, no doubt you've been working extremely hard on this in the last couple of years. We're talking about essays, we're talking about Scéalta and the Diasport or Óráid, which, as we said, is essentially it's very, very similar to an Ashta or an Alt. So when we take a look at the options here, you only have to answer on one, and I only recommend that you answer on one. That first 5 minutes, I suppose, reading through the paper, you're talking about formulating your opinion as to which one suits you best. Which title will you be taking on? And as we can see here, in previous years, we've had An Post Bawat Lum Machn, The Job I'd Like in the Future, Laura Lay Milagenia, Hackney Morning, a book that I read recently that I enjoyed, Morailta Sport, Erin, my favourite Irish sports star, and Three You Down, The Third World. It's so wide. It's often to do with hobbies, pastimes, areas of interest for young people, for teenagers such as yourselves. And it's not a bad option, but there's a very kind of distinct style of writing that goes with it. You're asked to write in around a page and a half, and realistically a page and a half to 2 pages, even into 2.5 pages if you have the time and the space to do so, is advisable. The marking scheme on this is very straightforward. For the Stíl, in other words the way in which you've written it, you get 2 marks. For the Ábhar, sticking to the subject of the piece itself, again that's worth 8 marks, and then the standard of Irish that you use, the Gaeilge, there is worth 40 marks. So first and foremost, it's not a case of just because the Irish is good, you're guaranteed to get the 40 marks. It has to be relevant to the title that you're writing on. So there's a kind of a sliding scale of marks, I suppose we want to look at it in that way, insofar as if the subject doesn't match up to the title that you've indicated that you're writing on, you won't get the same amount of marks. You won't get marked out of 40 for the standard of Irish. Even if it's Shevu, Uru, Fada Perfect, it has to relate to that topic, and keep bringing it back to the topic. That's a very, very good point to make, to note that you really have to keep bringing it back to the topic and remind the examiner, remind the reader what it is that you're writing about. It's about personal expression. It's about sharing your ideas and your opinions, and the information that you have in relation to this particular topic. Moving on swiftly to the Scéal or the Actra, the story part of it, or the event. Sorry, just some topics here that we have as well that have come up in the past. Friends, Córas Oidhechais, perhaps the education system, and Gaeilge, the Irish itself, agus an Gaeltacht, Fáiban an Duine Óg, young people problems, Buchtanas, poverty, Cóiriúlacht, crime, and Timplacht agus Triálu, so the environment and pollution, Cursey Sláinte, and to do with health, sport, pastimes and hobbies, and even delving into a little bit deeper to do with sport itself, to do with music, to do with television, favourite television star. No doubt you've done a huge amount of work on this previously, and just remember those phrases that you've worked at as well, rather than perhaps full essays or full titles. To be able to use the phrases and the verbs is all important here in structuring your answer. And you have a little bit of time for planning, 10 to 15 minutes perhaps for the planning part of it here, and then another 35 to 40 minutes for the execution of the actual of the writing of the essay, or the writing of the Diasport or the Scéal. Next after that we have the Scéal section, and with the Scéal it comes up in 2 different ways. So first of all we have Cap Scéal Ameach an Gota Shohias Irunach Mar Húsleis, and it is stated, as you can see in the bold font here, Mar Húsleis. So this should be the opening statement. Bhí me ag fánacht go nervíse clas muidíh gan phríomhaide, cén scéal den seán dí. So waiting nervously outside the principal's office, what story would I tell her? And the story flows from there. Now you do need to stick quite closely to that opening. You wouldn't stray too far from it. So for example, some of the topics that we're looking at here, for example, Timpiste, Ruboil, Actor Granver, a funny event, Leighton the Sierra, holidays, kosher. Obviously some of these just wouldn't relate to this particular title. If you're waiting outside the principal's office, it's very unlikely that you can tie that into perhaps Leighton the Sierra or kosher. But perhaps an Actor Granver, a story that you prepared previously on a funny event that's happened. A Timpiste maybe, it doesn't relate to every single title, and really the skill on the day is spotting the potential in the question and being able to tie it into the topic that you're writing on and the previous work that you've done. Again, phrases, verbs that you've used previously, make sure that it's structurally sound, and make sure that it's written at a very, very high standard where there's few mistakes grammatically, spelling as possible. Next after that is the second option, and it's Actra a Hordum nor bhí me féin agus mo chara ag siopadóireacht. So something that happened, an incident that happened when myself and my friend were shopping, and that's really wide open. You can tie so many of the previous essays that you've done, the previous work, the Scéalta that you've done, to this particular title. But it is important to keep it relevant, because as we saw before, the marking scheme, you do need to tap into that 8 marks there for the Ábhar, because if it's not relative, it doesn't relate to that of or the subject that you've indicated that you're going to write on, well, then you don't get marked out of 40. You don't get the full complement of marks there. Another very important point here is just, and I should say for all of the exam papers, is to clearly indicate what question it is that you're answering. So for example, if you don't mark it as A, option I, well then how's the examiner to know that it's not question B, option I? And if that's the case, you've written something that's completely different and perhaps running the risk of being marked out of nothing, losing all marks because you haven't clearly indicated what question it is that you're taking on, that you're attempting. Following that and moving on swiftly, the diaspora question here we have, or the Óráid, which is the speech, very, very similar questions. Again, you need to have this done previously. There's no point in me saying at this stage, if you put this in at the start and this in at the end, you'll be fine. But those of you who've studied it, those who've prepared it, you know what I'm making reference to. Carla Gawaltori, Luchtan Rasora, Achoskalori, Ismisha, whoever, August, Tommy and Shaw, Nucht, Kun, Unrun, whatever happens to be a flay. And then to finish up the course, to say Gur Mila Magwiv as Ucht Eishtaklum, thanking the audience for listening to you. And in the course as well of the debate, or perhaps of the speech, that you really kind of make the point that you are involved in a debate or you are involved in a speech, and that you make the point of I believe, or my team agrees with me, or we don't agree with the opposition, phrases that you would have worked with during the course of the last 2 years. If you haven't taken a look at the sport Óráid, don't worry about it too much, because you do have the 5 options up above, which are Ashta or your Alt, Nuachtan or Irisha. So really what you've best prepared for to date, that's the one you focus your attention on, and I'm sure things will go absolutely fine there. Right, moving on swiftly to paper 2. Now paper 2 is obviously made up of 90 minutes, 90 marks. Perhaps it is as clear as a mark a minute if you want to look at it that way, but there's I suppose a little bit of difference along the way here, because some of the materials that some of the questions you'll be answering will be materials that you've worked with previously, particularly for the Filiocht and the prose sections, whereas others it'll be completely unseen material before. So a piece of prose that you haven't seen before, needing to answer questions on that, and that really requires a deep level of understanding as to what's going on in that particular piece to get the most marks out of it. And then as well as that, with the Filiocht, with the poetry part, it's a case of 2 poems in most cases that you haven't seen, and in answering 3 questions based on those 2 particular pieces. In some cases, a comparison. There are some bits and pieces of vocab that can help along the way, but again, because they're unseen, because we're not sure what's going to feature on the day, it's nearly impossible to prepare 100% for them. So let's focus on what we can and what we have prepared on for the most part. And of course, the letter on Litzer being the last section there. I'm sure you've done plenty of preparation in that regard to date. So let's take a look first of all at the prose section. Now, as I said to you there, this is a section where it's very, very difficult to prepare for, because it changes every single year. But needless to say, and I'm sure as you're all very, very aware at this stage, you answer 2 questions from A, the options that are given to you, and 1 question from B, or 2 questions from B and 1 question from A. So just let's be very clear on that. Don't answer any more than you need to, or that's required of you. So if you feel that the questions in section B suit you better, well then answer them. In other words, if the Bumthishkins of the questions in A suit you better, go for 2 of them instead. It's very, very difficult to read the entire piece and understand every single word of the entire piece for the vast majority of students in this section. And those of you who really are working at a very, very high standard indeed. It's quite time consuming, and it can be quite laborious if you don't fully understand everything that's going on here. So what I'd say to you is to focus, to have a read through. Maybe before you have the read through, to focus on the questions, and again get your highlighters, red pens out, and to focus on key question words. And as you get a feel for, as you get an understanding of what's going on in that particular piece, then you can start really focusing on exactly what questions it is that you want to answer in relation to them. The answers tend to be quite short. Again, I wouldn't recommend going down the route of quoting half paragraphs or quoting entire sections out of the piece itself. It's really down to accuracy and precision, and it's down to understanding those keywords again. So if the keyword is asking for when, well then you really try to identify the when part of it. If it's asking for how many, well then it's the amount, as opposed to writing out the entire paragraph. If it's about the characteristics of the person or traits of the character, as you'll see for the most part in section B, well then you need to have a bit of a wider vocab, quite a lot of adjectives which allow you to describe the characteristics and traits of that particular person or that character in the piece. It's very frustrating, I suppose, from my perspective and from yours. I'm sure your teachers as well, in trying to prepare for these pieces. And all you can really do is practice, and all you have been doing up to date, I suppose, is practice, and to make sure that you have that wider vocab, particularly with the traits and characteristics, the adjectives that can help you out there. Outside of that, it's really what comes up on the day, your understanding of it, and answering it to the best of your ability. Following that, and of course time-wise, I would strongly recommend trying to keep that as close to the 15-minute mark as possible. So what you tend to find is that the questions are two-part questions, and the marks are broken down into 4 for information and 1 for the standard of Irish within them. What I'd strongly recommend in this particular case is that you try to limit yourself to 5 minutes per question where possible, because if you go over the 5 minutes per question, well, then you're really going to struggle in keeping under the time in the latter part of the exam, particularly in the letter. So with the second section here for the prose, it's a gar scale, ur scale drama. So it's, in other words, it's a short story, it's a novel, or perhaps a drama that you studied in class. Some examples of these that you may find, that you may have done: Antá, Díoltas Mhaith Ruadh, Banrín na Nuaghnis, Spás, Kalua, Agus, and Gadi. They're just some of the examples. They're the ones that I'd certainly focus on classes myself. And the question has changed somewhat in recent years, because it's moved away from the theme and just the theme to focusing on characters and the characteristics and traits of those characters. So it's important that you're tuned into that as well. But really what's important here is that you have the title and the author of the piece. Make sure you mention them. They're worth mark each. The thema and visa. So what's the theme of the piece, or what are the themes of the piece? You may be asked just to write about one, or you may be asked for kind of a general kind of overview of what's going on in the story. Usually it focuses in on one. And the muhukan, the feelings and the emotions. Character or characters, the piece, so one character or characters in the piece itself. And did you enjoy it? Give reasons why. So it's a nice way to kind of finish up your answers, to say, I enjoyed studying this piece for whatever reason. It's a good way to wrap it up. So, or you didn't, if that is the case, usually stick with the positive, try to be as positive as possible in your answering. But basically what we have here is Dina Mishnu, so a brave person, Dina Glick, clever person, Carjul, friendly person, Dina Cowrock. And those of you who studied on Tá, Díoltas Mhaith Ruadh, Banrín na Nuaghnis, you'll recognise these people in the stories, okay? And as you can see, Dina Shafodach, Dina Sprunlahe, then we have the various themes that we have. So Mishnach, Clishdach, Talan, Clydrocht, Canaltas, Leshgulach, Boss, Osnadort, all the themes. And again, at this stage, it's just really to refresh your memory as to what they are, where they feature, the stories they feature in, and please don't get them mixed up. I've seen that before in junior cert scripts, where students will mix up the name of the author and the story with the actual theme, and they'll start referring to a character from a different story or from a different drama or a different novel in their answer. So make sure you have it right in your own mind before you put pen to paper. And realistically, you're talking anywhere between kind of 3/4 of a page to page and a bit in this particular question. It does say 15 lines or so, but realistically, for the very, very highest marks, you're going to need a bit more information than that. And of course, the standard of Irish is being judged here as well. So make sure spellings, make sure Shevaha, Uraha, fathers, the whole lot, make sure you have everything in place. Following that, we have our section on Filiocht. And again, it's very, very frustrating in an awful lot of ways, but the only advice you can really give you here, as with the Bunt Hishkent, agus Lair Hishkent Safros, it's down to the practice that you've done and making sure that you have some basic phrases to be able to make a comparison between the two poems, perhaps in this case, or the emotions and the feelings in the two poems. What you tend to find is that the Bunt Hishkent, in other words, your understanding of the poem, features in section A, and most students tend to go for 2 questions from A and 1 question from B, because they're more straightforward. Because it's an unseen piece, and because there isn't as deep an understanding required to answer the questions in A as there would be in B. Other than that, the questions in B, they can really kind of vary from perhaps a similarity between the two poems, to a difference between the two poems, to the themes that are the themes that are being discussed in the poems. It really, really varies, or perhaps 2 or 3 lines from one particular poem and how it's similar to another 2 or 3 lines in another poem. But really it's down to experience again, and the hard work you've done over the last couple of years in preparation for that. Moving swiftly on, we see the Danta, the Filiocht that we have prepared for, and again just a short list of poems that you may have prepared for or may have done at this stage. So Milish, Lashem Sunail, Antozone, Imagla, Rochog Varfach, Mach an Tailure, again, just ones that poems that I'd always study with junior cert classes myself. But really, the really important aspects that you need to have here: Tedal and Fila, Tedal agus Fila and Don. So, do you have the title? Do you know the name? Make sure the spelling is right there, 100%, and of course the name of the poet is right as well. Scéal agus Téama and Don. So, what's the background to it? What's the story? What's the message behind the poem? Muhukan, the emotions or the feelings. Agus Dina Sadan, perhaps a person in the poem. The person is being discussed, who's the key figure in it. Agus Hatan and Don Lat, again, to wrap up, I enjoyed this poem because, or I didn't enjoy this particular poem because. And some of the feelings, emotions, some of the traits, characteristics that you may be asked on, very, very similar to the previous list, perhaps not as many of them. Brown, Aid, Geotis. In some cases, in most previous years, you've been given an option of 6 of these, and you're asked to choose one. So really, it's a case of choosing the one that suits you best in relation to the poem that you know best, perhaps, or perhaps you may want to focus your attention on the theme that runs through the entire poem, or perhaps one part of the poem. But it is important that you have enough information, if that's the case, to be able to write in around that kind of 3/4 to a page and a bit. And of course, quotations are quite important here. If you can get a quotation in, it's advisable, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. If you can, fantastic, and by all means do. Following that, we have our letter section, and the letter section, as we've seen in previous years, and we'll just take a look at the actual exam paper, paper 2, from 2015. And as you can see, and as I'm sure you're very, very aware and familiar with it at this stage, you're given 3 options, and what you're asked to do is to write on one of the 3. And an awful lot of students would say, well, if I have time, should I be writing 2, or should I, write? I wouldn't recommend it. Personally, I just think, focus your attention on the one that suits you best. Focus your attention on getting it all right, and not to kind of, let your eyes stray down towards the other question once you've made that decision. So, for example, in previous years, in 2015, for example, we've had a couple of informal letters followed by a formal letter, and we've kind of touched on both of them here in the notes that we have, notes that we're using in our preparations. And what's important to take note of here is your marking scheme, because a lot of students will just go about writing a letter and think that they're going about it the right way, but really the marking scheme is all important here, because you're given 5 tasks to carry out, and if you don't address each one of those tasks, well, then your marks diminish very, very rapidly. So, for example, given this year, 2015, the question asked, Cúig tú scanán sa fictúil na Janie. You saw a movie in the cinema recently. Scríb litir chuig de cara faoig, write to your friends. That's obviously an informal letter. In your letter, mention Animan scanán, agus príomhfuintí an scéal a bhí sa scanán. So the name of the film and the main points, the main themes in the actual and story of the film. Rud amháin a hatanat agus rud amháin nár hatanat. So one thing you enjoyed, one thing you didn't enjoy, a David Scanlon about the film. Agus actor biog amháin a harla a mask and look fekene lin and Scanlon. Now you got 3 bullet points here, but within the 3 bullet points, you've really got 5 different tasks. So you've been asked to name the film and the main points about it. So within that, there's actually 2 points being covered. One thing that you enjoyed and one thing you didn't enjoy. So there's another 2 points. And the last is one funny thing that happened, actor of yoga horror, not even funny, but one event that happened with the audience during the film. So again, that's 1 point. Now, where this really is important, and where this comes with a warning, I suppose, is that if you don't address all 5 points, and if you give all your information on, say, 2 pieces of information required there, well then, unfortunately, you're going to lose marks, regardless of how good it is, regardless of how much detail you give in relation to one of the points. If you don't address all 5, you lose out on quite a lot of marks. The reason for this is being, you get 3 marks for your address, so having a proper address, for your banu, that's your welcome, or your introduction, asking how everything is and how all is, and hope that everybody's well, and your creek, saying hope to see you soon, all the best, your friend, whoever happens to be, Duchara, and then signing off. So there's 3 marks to be gotten there. And the structure is important. So those 3 marks should be a given. Everybody should at this stage have lots of practice in them, and that's a given. Following that, the 5 tasks. And here's our sliding scale of marks. For answering 5 tasks or attempting the 5 tasks, you get a mark out of 10. And for the standard of Irish that you have in attempting those, you get marked out of 17. But by not attempting one of those tasks, so let's say, for example, if we take a look at the 2015 paper, let's just say you didn't mention something you didn't enjoy about the film. So you failed to mention Rud nor Hatton Lat that David's gone on. You've done everything else, but you haven't mentioned something that you didn't like about the film. Well, now all of a sudden, you're not being marked out of 30 anymore. As you can see, you've lost 5 marks for not addressing that point, so you're being marked out of 25. And the same follows through for each additional mark or each additional point task that you miss out on. So if, let's say, for example, you don't mention anything that you liked or disliked about the film at all, that's 2 gone, so that's 10% gone. And so on, down to the point that you may only be marked out of 10 as opposed to being marked out of 30. So it's really important that you address those particular points, each particular point in the question. And in making your decision, most students will tend to go for options A or B traditionally because they tend to be the informal letters. But don't write off option C altogether. Sometimes it can be the more doable option, the easier option if you want to call it that. None of them are particularly easy, I would say, but it may be the option that suits you a little bit better, depending on what the complaint is or depending on what the letter is based on. But just to make sure that you have the following in place. You have an address. You have a go-to address, perhaps for where you live, perhaps for somewhere you're on holidays. It's very important that you have that in place. You have a date or a couple of dates, depending on whether it's based during the summer, during the Christmas period, so on. You have your Banu, so if it's a Liam Achara, a Una Achara, or a Yadi Yil, and Yil, D-H-I-L, of course, is when it's somebody who's close to you, perhaps a family member. Next after that, Tusna Litruk, and again, it's the kind of chat at the start. How are you? I hope things are being well. I hope you're fine. Just a couple of examples here. Kunasa Tatu, Baha Agus Lanche, Tasulugum Gultu Guma, Tasulugum Gultu Fein, August the Winter, Amarnas Lanche. I hope you and your family are in the best of health. And then some basic information about yourself that doesn't necessarily deal with the 5 topics. Don't spend too much time on this section here because you don't get many marks for it. What you need to do is focus your attention, really focus your attention on what are the 5 tasks that have been asked in the paper and how am I going to go about answering each one of them, addressing each one of them. And of course, to finish off, in the middle of the paper of the letter, it is important that you have some phrases, some nahana kaincha, okay? It's the chat, it's the kind of banter, it's your phrases that kind of tie sentences together. Things as fungaglish to occur the Harladom Lejani. Wait till you hear what happened to me recently, rather than just jumping straight into Vime, Siffictulin, and yay. Wait until you hear what happened to me recently. Or needless to say, Marisoldit Vime, as you know yourself, I was in Dalat and Scale, by the way, Awful. However, for unfortunately, Eranos anyway. There's so many of them there that you can use, as you can see on the screen there in front of you. So please make sure you use them. They tie your letter together very, very well. And of course, time-wise, realistically, for the 30 marks that you have, you should be kind of spending around that half hour. Of the half hour, I would say 5 minutes, anything between 5 to 10 minutes on planning would be a very, very good idea, just to get your ideas together before committing them to paper. And obviously to make sure you address each of the 5 points. The Creek and Litruk, at the end, just to wrap it up nicely, you can have this prepared in your back pocket before you go into the exam. Aberle the Highlight grab me a corridorshka, tell your family I was asking for them. Cough me in the nish, I must go now. Overvalue the Creek and gum. The list goes on there. But make sure you finish off at the end. Michel Legra, the Harry, as you can see at the bottom there. Bye for now, with love, and then your name. That's very important for wrapping it up, and it's also worth a mark at the end. Following that, we have the formal letter, and the formal letter is similar but different in a couple of ways. The main point I'd say is to make sure that you have the Shola Anai Torah, so that's the recipient's address, to make sure that the company or the organisation you're writing to, you have an address written out for them, or you have some idea as to where it's going to. And of course, on Tagarhor being the editor, the Canasi, it's the head or the chair of, the pre-vigid, the principal of, whoever it is that is being addressed to, perhaps the Bonashtor if it's a restaurant or a shop. The Banu is slightly different as well, so the mark that's going here, Aguna Usul, in other words, sir or madam, Akara, or directly addressing it to Agarhor Akara, dear editor. The Tusna Litruk, you need to explain who you are, what you're writing about, the reason for it, the complaint that you have to make. And then, as you can see in the exam paper itself from 2015, it gives you 5 tasks as well. So Golfinch, Olish, V, it's an alt, a 19 too low, so 2 pieces of information that you agree with. two pieces of information that you don't agree with, and then one recommendation that you'd make that will help with teenagers. So again, this changes year on year, but basically the 5 tasks is what you need to make sure that you address. And if it's a case that you address all 5, well, then you're on the road to getting the full amount of marks out of this particular section, which of course is the 30. So, Sinna bhfuil umsa sílim sin an cursa or on scrúdú in a umlán. That's the exam in total there. Tá súla gom go raibh go gaillimh. I hope that you get on really, really well. I'm sure you will. There's no need to panic. Nearly there. You've put in the hard work over the last couple of years, and I'm sure it'll pay off. So, Gnáirí go gaillimh, ámór agus gur míle mágah as ucht éisteach liom inniu. Ámór, slán.